Good morning, Isabella.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Okay, I see there's Bud from Oman, people from Finland, Spain, Germany, Belgium. So we've got quite a crowd. Okay, I would say let's get started. So welcome everybody to today's GALA webinar. This is the first webinar in a new program, let's call it that, and it's 10 a.m. here in Europe. And this is meant to offer some webinars to our members who are not just in Europe and the Middle East, but also in Asia and Australia, because they haven't been able to attend the usual webinars at 8 a.m. Pacific time for obvious time zone reasons. So we hope that this program will become as successful as the first webinar program. So the first speaker who breaks the ice, so to speak, is István Lengyel, founder and CEO of Be Lazy, the company that makes agile localization possible across the whole supply chain. I like that. And previously, you probably remember, he was one of the founders of Kilgrey, the makers of MemoQ, and he's had a ginormous experience in the translation and localization industry. So he's going to talk all things automation. I'm looking forward to that. If you have any questions, please submit them in the chat. We can also open the microphones at some point for discussion if István feels is game for ask me anything about automation. But István, the floor is to you.
Absolutely. If there is anybody that has like a specific agenda why they came here, then this is probably the right time to mention that. And if not, then we will move forward with the slide deck. So this is a bit of a theoretical discussion here. I'm not going to pitch any of the tools, but I will mention many of them. It's more about how you can get started with automation if you haven't really gotten started. Maybe a good start would be to start with a little poll. I know that I'm overusing the word start now. And check how many of you at your organization are using any integration between two tools running. And please, it's a yes and no question, so not particularly the open-ended questions that are so really liked in sales. And throw a couple of examples into the chat, please. Everybody answered 91%. So you are not new to integrations, and you probably know what integration is. And here we are trying to be like clarifying what is automation, what is integration, what are the differences, what are the things to look at. I'm wondering if anybody sent, in the chat, like what they are doing.
Yes, we have Plunet MemoQ, XTRF phrase plus CMS, XTRF MemoQ integration with our ERP and Sage.
Very interesting. So you got business management into CAT tool, I like to call it, like that's the Plunet MemoQ XTRF. Then you've got the client management system, which is also probably the business, but it may also be a CRM type system for Elena. Then ERP and Sage, very interesting, because that is a lesser talked about area in our industry. Then Ian obviously has a lot of integrations, including the one that he himself built, Figma into MemoQ Crowdin and Translate 5. And then we have internal databases and financial tools with WordBee, very interesting. Crowdin and Drupal, GitHub, those are the CMS integrations or the code repository integrations in this case, but they are very similar. So we'll talk about these. And then let's run the other one, client portal and BMS. Let's run like whether you are using any command line script in your own work. Are you doing any kind of simple automation that requires you to go into a Windows shell or something, or like a very simple application could also be the same, and it performs some kind of functionality? Again, this is a yes and no, yes or no question, but any examples are very welcome in the chat. Much less, 30%, at a 54% participation rate. Any examples here that you would like to share? Please put them in the chat. Python scripts, so it's like for a specific customer or for a specific workflow, or like between the invoicing tool and your business management system, exporting from CAT tool and packaging for delivery. Interesting stuff. Okay, if you come up with any idea, simple Python script to manage Outlook easier. Email is also like a very important system that we all work with, and it's not very much talked about. But as a matter of fact, the #1 source of all the jobs that are coming and all the requests that are coming is even if you're using a business management system, it's email. I think in every company, regardless. So great stuff. Thank you very much for warming up to this topic. And now let's talk a bit about the objectives of this webinar. So there is like a lot of different terms that the industry is using, and not only the industry, but the world is using. And I want to tidy it up a bit. So we would like to go through the lingo around automation and give some definitions. Then also, what's the difference between our industry and other industries? Why is it that we are a little bit lagging behind everything else, as opposed to, let's say, the financial industry? Talking a bit about how to get started if you have not started. If you don't have like a particular vendor that is giving you the integration or the automation capabilities. And then finally, I used to be, and I'm still doing it a little bit, consultancy regarding process optimization, process automation, and I would like to give you a couple of hints on how to get started in doing this, because I have seen that there is a lot of need. Very large organizations can actually gain a lot from doing a process audit. It's not rocket science, but you just need to understand what you're doing. And maybe it's useful for some of you. I mean, I would definitely appreciate if there was more process experience in the industry, because I think every company right now benefits a lot from that. So why are we talking automation now? And why not 10, 15 years ago? It's not that there was no automation 10, 15 years ago. It's the integration became much more important. Because 10, 15 years ago, a company used SAP. A large company used SAP, and only SAP. Everything was with SAP. And then a translation department was using a world server, using something huge. And also, you had the Trados studios, you had the memo queues, like enormous functionality, a lot of functions. But with the cloud, there was a paradigm shift from monolithic tools. So what is important is that now the different teams in different organizations have much more tools at their hand available. They need to pick the best that suits their need, but they also need to make sure that they remain in sync with the rest of the organization. Another thing that's very important is that 10, 15 years ago, what was an invoice? In most countries, an invoice was that you could take a Word document, and that was good for an invoice. Today, countries like Italy, Portugal, Hungary, Peru, as I've heard yesterday, they are all requiring that within a couple of seconds you send in an XML all the contents of the invoice. You are able to see the invoices that were sent to you. And also financial institutions. I mean, I remember that a couple of years ago, my biggest pain was always like, I cannot go back in my stupid e-bank more than 3 months in transactions at a time. 3 months is nothing. If I'm looking for whether I paid something 2 years ago because somebody wants to see that, I want to see it in a 2-year time frame. And I didn't know if I paid it in February or in June. I had no idea. Financial institutions now offer APIs. You can start payments with a single call. Like a lot of the things have improved there. And they are part of every company, because every company needs to do taxes, invoicing. Every company needs to have like some kind of financial transactions. So the whole world has become much more digital, and you have to be adapting to that, because after all, in our industry, we are invoicing as well. And we are being invoiced, and that's also like a specific. Another thing that I've also seen is that fanciness and the marketing, and I'm not talking UX here, I'm talking about marketing value of a company, is often more important than how many functions you are doing. Like, for example, when I was at MemoQ, we had a chat function built into the system. And today, a lot of people are talking Slack. And you know why I'm saying fanciness is that I have used Discord, which is something very similar to Slack in a way, but it's more for gamers, and it's more like a server installed thing. And I think the only difference, I haven't really familiarized myself with Slack so much, but I have the impression that the two do exactly the same, but they are positioned differently. And then finally, there's another thing that we are starting to accept, which is that like what we were talking about for a long time is the maturity of the translation players, like both translation companies and translation buyers, going over time, like the different functions, like centralization, decentralization. And we have to see that different tools support different maturity levels. So if a company goes in their maturity forward, they also require a change of tools. So let's look at some of the concepts. The first one is integration. Integration is always between two systems, two distinct systems that talk with each other. Integration can have a manual trigger. So for example, if I have a command line tool, I can integrate two systems. I enter a command line, like command, of course, and I press enter, and that's a trigger. It can also have an automated trigger. Every time my email comes in, I want to send like some kind of a chat message, or I want to forward an email or something like that. And the integration can also be very simple, like send a chat message whenever something comes in, or very complicated, create a project on the basis of a project that you received in a vendor portal or a TMS. Automation, on the other hand, is depending on one step being done. There is also a trigger here, but it can also be in the same system. So an automation can actually take place with integration, but an automation can also be in the same system. So when you got, for example, a TMS that says, after a file is imported, immediately do an analysis and a pre-translation, that's automation, that's not integration. We also talk a lot about the no-code, low-code, middleware aspects. What are these? No-code systems are aimed at business users. It's basically people that have a little bit of a technical thing to put things together. It's a Lego. And it's got usually a visual drag and drop interface, and you can achieve a lot of things that are custom to you. But obviously, because it is aimed at business users, it has its limitations, especially when it comes to complex use cases. Low code, on the other hand, is trying to automate the low added value tasks. So it allows for more flexibility, and it also allows you to modify that code that was generated afterwards in order to keep the extensibility, keep the customizability. It is a tool that is for programmers. So it's not for business users. Low code is something that programmers can work with more efficiently. And then finally, there is the middleware, which is like in the past, there were middlewares like Xilio, like István Lengyel, like Clay Tablet. It is a full process automation, normally between two systems, which is normally a relatively complex thing. Middleware is more like solving a use case. rather than solving one business problem. A use case when you want to, let's say, integrate your CRM with your business management system, which is like, there are plenty of CRMs in the world. There is HubSpot, there is Salesforce, there is Zoho CRM, Pipedrive, one-page CRM, Close. There is many of those. And then there is also like TrueNet, XTRF, your own system, Protemos, Project-X, Translation Projects, Quahil, JustPoint, you name it. And there is a bit of an orchestration here, because obviously the problem statement, what it does, needs to be separated from the actual systems so that it can work with many combinations. And then what other automations are there? First, there is the full automation, which is normally a cloud or a server-based automation, so you don't have to trigger it manually. And triggers are always events of an automated system. So this is like a monitoring, that's the extra thing. But it does not exclude manual steps. This is, for example, what we do at BeLazy. That whenever a new project appears in your client's portal or translation management system, we see that automatically, and we create the project either manually or automatically. It's up to you how much automation you want. As opposed to total automation, which is like a system that doesn't even allow you to do something manually. It is only a couple of LSPs in our industry that have done something like this. But I think that they are very interesting. And then there is also the partial automation, which is, many people think about this when they think about automation, like running a little script. That is, I don't know, when I press a button or when I have like something timed on a server, installed on a server, it is taking all my, contacts from TrueNet and creates that in the invoicing system that we do. So in our universe, there is plenty of types of software. The business management system is the backbone of a translation company. It's not always there in an enterprise. Why is that? Because this is the one that allows you to work with multiple types of technologies, translation technologies, such as TMSs or computer-assisted translation tools, and still keep everything in one place. They're sometimes pretty tedious to manage because of its flexibility, and the user experience suffers sometimes from that. But on the other hand, this is your one place where you are able to see your vendors, your profits, your POs can be issued, and so on and so forth. Then you've got the translation management system, which takes care of ordering the translations and pre-processing it, and sometimes also the actual translation itself. These are often connected to content management systems. And here we can talk about the component-based, the document-based content management systems, the code repositories, product information management systems, digital asset management systems, design tools like Figma. These are many types. And in reality, a content management system that many of us use is a Google Drive or a OneDrive or a Dropbox. That's also a CMS, even though it's a simple one. And then you've got the computer-assisted translation environment tools where you are doing the work, where your vendors are doing the work. Sometimes you take a project from a TMS like Word Server, and you have it translated in Studio, in MemoQ, or in some other tool. You've got invoicing systems. I don't have to explain what those are. Customer relationship management systems like HubSpot, Zoho, and so on. You've got the communication systems such as Slack, such as Microsoft Teams. You've got the task management system, which is something that not every company has, but it's basically like, have you done this? Have you not done this? I've seen companies, for example, using Basecamp, and you've got emails. So these are the different types of tools that we are working with. Let's think automation for 1 second. And let's have a look at how many levels of activities exist in a translation project. This is one of my favorite things, because it's like, we are not going to talk here about technology. We are talking about the complexity of a problem. And if you are not able to embrace the complexity of a problem and model it well enough, I don't think technology is going to come to your rescue. at least not when you have to design it yourself. So first of all, like what you know is that when you got a translation job, you usually have a translation, you usually have a review, right? That's a job. One translator performs translation, the other performs a review normally. And then comes the fantastic thing that the client is checking the translation and comes back with implementation requests. How do you represent that? Is it part of your workflow? Because you have absolutely no deadline for your clients. You have absolutely no, you may not know who is doing it from the client's perspective. Do you represent it as something that is hidden in your system or not hidden if you're an LSP, obviously? Vice versa, if you're an enterprise, you order a TEP very often from an LSP. You don't know who's going to make the translation, who's going to make the review, unless you are something like Facebook or some big company. And then the question is, does the client always perform the same steps? Are they going to be performing, client review for every project or not? And then comes my favorite, which is the updates to existing solutions. How do you handle just this one more sentence? Can you still translate this one more sentence? Yes, and you've already started the project into 50 languages, right? That's so easy to add one more sentence. Yes, in Google Translate it is, but otherwise, it's a bit complicated because you have to contact your 50 translators. You may not need, if they are already working on this, you may not need to have a request for deadline and everything. I mean, one sentence they will fit in anyways. But the problem is that you still have to monitor out of those 50 linguists or 100 if it's with review, how many have returned that one more sentence. So in reality, it's a different project. Updates don't exist. The only way that some companies think that updates exist is that they are able to update before starting the project. That's a doable thing. Like then you just need to update the source text and then send it to 50 people with the one more sentence included, and then it's easier. Then the next thing is the data that you need available at project start? That's another thing that relates to updates, avoid updates. And then you also have other things like what I never understand really is the technology-induced steps such as the availability request. It's actually to me very often beyond comprehension. Like if somebody sends you, will you be available to translate this 200 words in 2 weeks' time? And then you come back and say, yes, I will be available. And then they send it in 3 weeks' time. What is that for? It's kind of like, for me, without a contract behind availability requests, this makes absolutely no sense. Because, if you're asking my availability, that I need to make sure that availability is there, then I need to be sure that I'm getting the job at that time, or I get some kind of compensation for the things that I have not taken in the meantime. But otherwise, it just becomes, sure, bring it on, which is actually just a pointless step because you don't really need to reinforce with the customer that they should bring it on. I mean, of course, if you are talking about 100,000 words, that's a different story. But very often in technology tools, you get availability requests for 2,000 words. I mean, of course, you are going to be able to solve it if it's in your standard languages. Somehow you will solve it. You may not solve it with your regular translators, but you will get somebody who is going to do it. So what about the quoting? This is where our industry is very different. The TMs need to be known if you want fuzzies. So in the quoting itself, you cannot do quoting without doing the project management and setting up the translation memories. Because otherwise, you may get different fuzzies. So this is an interesting thing because in our environment, it's not very likely that you are able to quote anything without using a TMS or without using a CAT tool. Okay, I'm saying the obvious thing, but if you look at it from the perspective of process, it actually means that you need to prepare your file. You need to get that file into a translation management system. You need to set up the right translation memories that are going to be used here, and then you are able to create a quote. This is why quoting with a CRM system like HubSpot, where you are able to say like 5 Hitachi TVs, 5 times 200 euros, it's 1,000, and that's your quote. This is why it doesn't work like that. Another thing is a quote a separate thing from part of a project? Like in your mind, you have to decide. There is no one good solution to this question or good answer to this question. But in your mind, you have to decide whether you're working with translation projects and the quote is part of that, or whether you think that a quoting is a separate step, and then there is like no real communication between this, no real continuity. Another thing that you have to know and you have to decide on if you want to automate things. Do you do approximate quotes? Let's say you got a PDF file. I mean, a real PDF file with the real fuzzies and everything can only be done once you have converted that PDF to an editable source text. But there are tools out there that are able to import a PDF and give you a fuzzy quote. But do you quote like this? Or are you able to quote, for example, per page? Like, these are going to be approximate quotes. Are you going to refine the quote when the customer is saying, yes, I'm interested in this, and after that charge a different amount? Are you sending this quote before, or are you just sending the refined amount at the end of the process as an invoice? These are all very interesting things. And then how do you quote if the customer uses a TMS? And there are a lot of customers that use a TMS, and usually they request their vendors to quote. I mean, a TMS itself on the customer's part is taking care of the fuzzies. So all of the fuzzy breakdown is there. You really need to quote here. I mean, what you usually need to do is add some things if extra costs come up here, like, for example, DTP costs per page, like some kind of preparation cost per hour, project management cost or something like that. But usually I don't see a need for a vendor to be able to look through the fuzzies and change the fuzzies in this case, provided that they have to use your TMs. Different story if they are using their own TMs, but then why do you use a TMS? And also, how do you do the quoting with MT? Another big question. So let's get technical now, because we were talking process here, and I just wanted to highlight the importance of understanding and really step-by-step, atomic step-by-step documenting your process, because that is the common point of every integration. I'm sometimes like really freaking out when people say like, can you integrate this or that system? It's like, how? Yes, of course, it's possible probably, but how? Like, what is your goal with it? What do you want to achieve? What functionality do you want? So it's more important than the actual brands that you're mentioning. Going back to the quoting for a second, we had a very interesting request a couple of months ago. We do have an integration between HubSpot and Plunet and XTRF. And there was one company that said that, look, what we're doing is that for every request from a customer, we are creating more than one quote. We create one for MT and we create one for full TEP. It's a valid case, right? And we want to integrate this with HubSpot. Now, HubSpot does not have the capability of dealing with quote variations or deal variations. How much do I put into the deal? HubSpot also doesn't have the capability to create quote documents. So the quote documents need to be coming from XTRF or Plunet, but they do have an integration on the other hand with something like PandaDoc. So the complexity of this case, just the fact that you have more than one variation for one quote, is actually making the whole integration story 10 times more complicated, because you need to understand what you are doing in which tool exactly. This needs very careful planning, and it's not something that you can do in an hour. Because you need to find out, like, where are you actually sending the codes from? Where are you storing the variations? Because if you look at it, the fuzzies are the same for MT and for TEP. What is different is actually the price for the new words mostly. So let's have a look at the differences between the different technologies, because you need to use different technologies in order to automate different types of applications. So command line, let's start with the simplest one. Everybody has seen a DOS or PowerShell or something like that. You open a command line and you say like something.exe, and there is an input file and there is an output file. And this is, for example, fixing your XML coding in badly formatted files, typical use case. Then you've got the desktop tools. Desktop tools are hard to automate. There are certain APIs available, but usually you need something like robotic process automation in order to address the challenge of clicking the buttons in the desktop tool. These tools exist, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples later. If you want to automate a desktop tool, you can either do like the APIs that were offered to you, but if this is missing, then you need to use an RPA tool. So for example, let's say if you're talking about Trados Studio, you're able to create some tools using the APIs that are kind of like the App Store type of tools, and they've got pretty good functionality there. But you could also go like click here first, click there first, like automated clickers exist as well. The next thing is the server-based tools. This, for example, in MemoQ, a project template has the capability of executing command line scripts that are running on the server. So in a server, you have a machine, you're able to install extra things, and these tools may be able to execute scripts. What's the problem? If it's hosted by someone else, then usually they freak out for the security problems. So most likely, if you want to do like advanced integration automation with server-based tools, such as Plunet, for example, you might need to be able to take it off, like not offline, but take it to your premises, or you need to be able to host this computer itself, because there are some companies that will say that, like, I'm sorry, we are not allowing you to install external code on this server. Then we talked about desktop, and now we're talking web. So server-based obviously doesn't mean whether it's web or desktop. It usually has now a web interface and possibly a desktop interface, but server-based only means that it runs on a computer and people are able to access the data there. Web-based is an interface. It's from a browser. They are easier to automate. There are several methods, like APIs. Of course, many tools have APIs, but that is not a web API. But on the other hand, in the modern technologies of web development, the server and the client is actually integrating via a set of APIs themselves. You are able to capture this using the developer tools, let's say in Google Chrome. You're able to see what kind of a discussion goes between the systems, and reverse engineering this a bit for interoperability, which I have to mention that in most of the world, interoperability is the only reason why it's legal to reverse engineer any type of system. If you reverse engineer that, you are able to get to the gist of the communication, and you're able to recreate that. And then finally, the cloud environments that are fully cloud, or like microservices or serverless functions or things like that, need an orchestrator, something that is driving, like if this is telling me something that this needs to go, it's a messaging, it's a CI/CD pipeline. It's kind of like, there can be many ways of doing this. It's a platform as a service. Basically, it needs an orchestrator, and it also needs that every component that you are calling must be available from the cloud. So if you had, for example, a command line, you can create a serverless function from that. And then it's a cloud equivalent of a command line tool, and you can call it with an API. So let's look a little bit at the basics of APIs. So there are two main APIs. This is not like there is the GraphQL and there are some other approaches to APIs, but these are the two most widely spread APIs in our industry. SOAP, a simple object access protocol, is an older type of an API, which is in our industry. You've got Plunet has a SOAP API, MemoQ has a SOAP API, for example, and there is the sometimes more modern but definitely simpler to access REST API, which have like a self-generating atomic approach. SOAP has a bigger like workflow-based approach normally, and REST has the approach of very atomic steps. Like, I upload a file, I am going to assign this file to this project, and I'm going to be performing machine translation on this file. Whereas in REST, perform machine translation on this file, period. So one thing that I have to say is that when you hear about APIs, does this have APIs? It's not enough. First of all, you need to know the tool, because for an integration, for an automation to work, you really need to know what you're doing. You cannot, this is my recipe for success. If you're not able to create a video that goes through exactly the steps that you want to automate, then you're going to fail. Because normally what you want to automate is things that you are able to show manually. Maybe you don't want to do it with 2 invoices. You want to do it with all the invoices. You don't want to do it with 2 vendors. That's not a problem. If you're able to do it right for 2 entities, you're going to be able to do it right for 200. Maybe not for 200,000, because that's a scalability issue, but you are able to scale up very, very quickly. So first of all, understand the tool, then have a look at the APIs, because the APIs will use the tool's terminology. And if you don't know what is a resource, or what is a job, or what is a project, then you are not going to really know how to use the APIs and what to do one after the other. And then there is one tool, this is the first tool that I'm mentioning today, Postman, which is a typical API testing tool. Very simple. I mean, in this 1 hour, I'm not able to give you a full rundown on how to use this, but actually when I'm showing this to people, 10, 15 minutes, and they are already able to do things that are kind of, wow, I never knew that I could do this. So in Postman, a lot of the REST APIs, at least, have a downloadable so-called Swagger definition that you're able to import into Postman. It's giving you all the API calls that a simple tool, that any tool can do. Okay, and then you make the most out of it. Most important is always the authentication to get it right in the APIs, to make sure that it's not going to say like, you are not allowed to do this. That's the most important, and there are variations there. Next topic is webhooks and callbacks. What are these things? Not every tool offers this, that offers an API, but these are the things that tell you, I'm ready, come to me now. Imagine, for example, the emails. You've got the emails coming in all the time. But you cannot tell whether you're going to get an email every 3 minutes or every 30 seconds, or you are not going to get an email for the next 3 hours. What you can do is that you can go into the emailer and, have I received an email? Have I received an email? But you can also say that whenever you have received an email, please notify me. And I'm not talking about notifying you, because then it doesn't make much sense to send an email when you receive an email. But email notifications, for example, about other things but receiving an email are very, very common in our industry. A project has been offered to you, a project has been awarded to you, a project was gone, a project has been completed, XY started work on it. You get email notifications. Imagine webhooks and callbacks like email notifications, but in a more technical way that can communicate between systems. And then finally, the APIs grew in importance because of a development approach called microservices, where actually APIs are also much more important between the internal parts of a system. So for example, we are working with like Belazy is a microservice-based tool. Another microservice-based tool is, for example, Trados Enterprise, which used to be Language Cloud. There are a few in our industry, not very many actually yet. And basically, these are little pieces that are communicating with each other using messaging queue and using APIs. And it's because of the modularity of such solutions, APIs are very natural to have. So now after this, if there are any questions, I'm very happy to answer, but let's get familiar with some tools, like what are they good for? So Postman, very useful for API testing. It works with cloud-based or server-based tools that have their own APIs. It works with REST and SOAP. Don't get started with SOAP APIs if you have not yet done anything with REST APIs, because it's much more complicated. It is actually very solid because it's a standard. SOAP is a standard. REST is not a standard. But it's an XML-based approach, and it's a little bit complicated. The other thing, if you are, let's say, a translator, look at AutoHotkey, which is automation for desktop keystrokes, super powerful for desktop tools. And then you've got the platform as a service or orchestrators. Zapier is probably the most famous. We use Make a lot. It's very affordable. Blackbird.io is a new company that is concentrating on our industry. Workato is something relatively well known as well. You got MuleSoft, and even Postman has its own flow system. And I forgot to mention, there is another orchestrator in our industry, Phrase orchestrator. So Phrase, that used to be MemSource earlier, they've also taken the step that, we cannot program everything ourselves. We give you a tool, and with this tool, you're able to bring things together and also connect to external tools and perform operations that otherwise would be like a little bit hard, because you can do it on the APIs, but how do you make it always happening? You need something that runs those APIs, because Postman is not running that for you all the time, unless with the flow. And do you have to use the Phrase orchestrator to orchestrate Phrase? Absolutely not. But because of companies buying from companies, this makes sense from the perspective of a sales point of view, and they would also support that. Let's move to Selenium, which is an automated testing tool for websites originally, and several companies have built automations on top of Selenium. Then you've got the robotic process automations that are good for desktop tools and also APIs, obviously. The typical ones are Automation Anywhere and UiPath here. You might have heard about those. There is Camunda and N8N, which are also iPaaS. I separated these from the Zapier and others on the top, because Camunda, I know, is in use in this industry, at least I know 3 companies that are doing their own business management, 3 large LSPs that are doing their own business management on this. It's an open source, low code solution, much more complicated than the ones above. But on the other hand, it seems that they are able to do like enterprise grade things. So things that otherwise would be very expensive to do. And N8N is super interesting because it's open source, iPaaS, and it's also installable. So the problem with all the ones above is that they are in the cloud. And you know, some customers don't want the cloud. Whereas N8N is something that you can also just install on a server. So it can also be a server tool. Then Isabella, if you think we should answer any of the questions right now, then I'm happy
if you
to
want
do that,
to,
or I can also move forward with.
let's just finish your slide and then take the questions. Why not?
Okay. So what is our set of tools? There are a couple of CMS connectors. I've taken this from the NIMSI Atlas, which is work of Yulia Kulkova. As you can see, there is a plenty of middleware. There is even more MT aggregators. So we've got the CMS connectors that take input from a content management system and put it into a translation management system mostly. WordB is the one that offers like also independently from their tool, but the other ones are integrating the different tools. Then you've got Be Lazy, for example, that is doing 3 different use cases. One is like translation management system or vendor portal projects into business management systems. The other is creating projects in the business management system from email. There is the email assistant. And the third one we do is CRM integration, like HubSpot with Plunet and XTRF. And then there is the general iPaaS, which I found 2 tools in our industry, like specific to our industry, Blackbird, whom I mentioned before, and Run My Process, which is a company that was bought by Corby. What else? Obviously, if you look at the technology atlas, most of them have automation. But there are some that are more API-centric than others. So Lexica, for example, is a great QA tool, which is API-based. But also Verifica has a QA with an API component. So that means that you could run your QA automatically when a project comes in. The PM doesn't have to open it. You're able to get, you know, some kind of an indication. Model Front, it's about translation quality estimation. It's about like, should I use this or that translation like MT engine on my text? Is it going to be reliable enough or not? But it's also useful for human revision. Is this something that is going to be like correct or not? Scientific, which used to be Pactera Edge earlier, also have worked on translation quality estimation using large language models, which is kind of impressive. And then Content Quo is a set of tools that is around the separation of the LQA function for enterprises. And then you've got also the Okapi framework, super, super strong. Okapi, definitely, I suggest that you have a look at it because you can do a lot of the document preparation, document pipelining with this. The tools are there. What's the difference between the linguistic pipeline? I mean, we talked before about project management, about CRM, about invoicing integrations, but there is a typical thing, which is like run a translation quality estimation, run a QA. I take an XLIF, I manipulate it, and I put it back into the system. This is a very typical use case. Or I take an XML and I manipulate it and I put it back into the system. I take an Excel file or a CSV file, I manipulate it and I put one or more files back into the system. These are somewhat easier to do than other things, but the problem is that XLIF, although almost every tool uses it, every tool uses it slightly differently. So if you just want to lock out certain segments, which is very often the case what you want to do, the locking is not the same if you're using system A or system B. Trados, Phrase, XTM, whatever, it's not the same. Another thing that is super important always to keep in mind is that tools have primary and secondary functions, and you need to know what you are using. So for example, Plunet has a CRM, but HubSpot is a CRM. how are you going to be dividing the functionalities between these two? Also, let's say workflow management. Every TMS, every CAD tool has some kind of workflow management. Every BMS has workflow management. How is that workflow coming together? That's always very, very important to know. So last topic, how can you become an automation consultant? First of all, get your hands very dirty. If you don't experiment with your possibly limited resources, I can tell you, I'm not a programmer either. Then you are not going to understand the depth of the problem. The other thing is that you cannot automate what two people don't perform the same way multiple times. So you first need to work on the process, and after that, you can think about the automation of that process. You need to have an alignment in the team, understanding that if this and this and this metadata are the same for a project, I'm going to always do this and this, no exception. And why is that? Because otherwise you don't really know what is triggering that exception. And while we always talk about, AI now, I must say that I have not seen anything interesting in AI regarding automation so far. Obviously, code and all these things that are like language models are creating, that's very, very useful. But when it comes to fine-tuning processes, I've never seen anything so far. Another thing, video. Video is super useful. If you have two people that perform the same thing the same way, then also make a video of that. And then you see all the different bits and pieces. And then you can actually use that as specification for automation. Also, then go into interviewing. There is no such thing as sometimes. Sometimes I need to do it like this. You have to drill the person until they say, what is that time? You have to give them ideas. Why is it? You have to basically always go down to a very deterministic approach. You need to document the process step by step. Sometimes you get to the end of the process and you realize that there is a sometimes somewhere and it's going to be turning the whole thing upside down. That can happen. Don't get very frustrated by it. Next thing is, there are two ways of looking at productivity. There are some companies that like to automate steps with productivity, but I always recommend going for achieving objectives. What do you want? I want to invoice my customer according to this and this requirement, and I want the vendors to get the purchase order. That's much better than automating the steps because you can cut a lot of steps that way. Another thing that is very similar to what I said, like before this point, was that you have to reiterate. You have to go top down and then bottom up and test and go top down again. So the thing is that until you've got a rock solid process, there is actually no stopping, because sometimes you cannot imagine what are going to be on the bottom, the circumstances why your original idea is not going to work. And then you're looking at what people are doing, and that's also not enough, because then the top level objective is not necessarily met. Automation in an organization always must have a sponsor, and people must be ready to make decisions. You're not going to get anywhere that is just with people who are afraid that they would lose their job or anything. Because if people don't commit and take responsibility for what they are doing, there's going to be a reason not to use the automation. And it's not a real thing. It's not that the automation doesn't work. It's that you did not have enough patience with the people. And usually you design an automation. Things are 98% correct, because that is how far we get in our thinking. And the 2% is going to be a couple of small changes, but that 2% can make or break something. Then finally, one more topic is the metadata. All the data that is necessary for each decision should be available upfront when you start the process. Frame the process so that you can get everything in the beginning. You can get a form, you fill out that form, and then everything can go through almost automatically. This is how you should be doing it. And if you think that you're only getting later in the course of the process some kind of information, try to bring it back to the beginning. How could I translate it to a way that it's going to be available for me already at the beginning, and that the other person doesn't have to think about it? Because maybe that person takes 3 decisions and gets to that, which you are getting there. Preempt those 3 decisions. Ask 4 pieces of data then, and then you are going to get it right. So last slide, which is baby steps. If you want to start experimenting, don't start too big. Use a TMS with a strong REST API, like Trados Enterprise, Translate 5, Phrase, XTM as well, Localize, Crowd in RDs. Then also use a BMS with a strong REST API. Don't start experimenting with something as complex as BlueNet. But for example, Protemos has very nice REST APIs. Even if you're not using the system for experimentation, it can be very useful. Use Postman, and then use a simple integration platform. I know and I can recommend for starters make.com. Always imagine a use case and try to implement that use case and see where the difficulties are. See what decisions you need to make. And then take also a lot of documentation. And this way, with small things, you're able to prevent failures later. So don't start planning the entire organization's tech stack, how it is going to talk to each other if you've never done something small. But after a couple of small steps, you're able to get to something big. And of course, if you need help, I'm here, reach out, please. Here is my email, and you can add me on LinkedIn as well. And if we still have a minute, we have a minute, then we can get to the questions. And thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, of course.
Taking so much time.
Yeah, thank you so much, István. That was a masterclass in automation. Thank you so much. And I see there are a lot of questions. There are also a couple of questions of people who would like to see automation in practice. I don't know what you think, but I think the best thing would be for them to contact you, so they can discuss specific cases.
I can show, for example, a quick Be Lazy video somewhere, but I can also show like some kind of a make. You don't see my screen right now, correct?
We see your, yes, we see your screen. We see your slide deck.
Okay, I'm not on the deck. I paused it. So let me just do a simple
Sure.
thing very quickly. And in the meantime, feel free to ask me.
Well, we have 4 questions more or less, so.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so first question was about the major security issues when running an automation project and how you would address them with desktop software, server-based integration software and connectors, REST and SOAP connectors. Is it true, in your opinion, that low-code and no-code solutions are less exposed to security issues?
Security issues are always very interesting because I think that they are always very much depending on the vendor's willingness to address security. So low code and no code, obviously more people use it. But if you look at even any kind of software development today, you're using a million libraries. You need to be able to monitor all of these for upgrades and security issues. There are tools for this, like we use one called sync.io in our development. And the thing is that I don't see that low code or no code is very problematic when it comes to security. I think it definitely depends on the credentials, but more the approach that the vendor takes. So I think that security is always a holistic issue. And I mean, I can imagine that the problem is that if you're using low code, there is an exposure to a vendor. But if you're not using low code, I mean, we are super exposed, for example, to Microsoft. And how it works is that, we have ISO 27001, but at the same time, it's like Yes, and Microsoft has ISO 27001. Could I do anything if there was a security issue there? No, I can just trust in Microsoft.
Okay, then is the Okapi framework still open source?
I suppose so.
Okay.
I don't think it
Needs to be
changed.
checked. Okay. Let's talk about empty quality estimation tools. Are there any available for integration to be shared with both sides in a project?
What do you mean by both sides?
Good question.
That's
Client and language service provider, for example. I think that's what they mean.
I mean, I do think that the likes like Model Front is offering an API. I know that Scientific is offering an API, and basically these are like, if you've got an API, then it can be put into any kind of workflow, like anywhere it can be plugged in.
Okay. Do you understand, let's rephrase this. Are you aware, of course, that the process you described for requirement collection in an automation project assumes one has a very deep knowledge of their own processes, that is, being ISO 9000 certified helps? So I guess the question is, does being ISO 9000 certified help?
I mean, in itself, I think it does, but in reality, this is when I'm talking about videos. That in reality, very often, you know, an ISO 9000 is modular, but not step-based modular. What's always a problem is, you know, translation. Think about translation project. For certain ways, like invoicing and everything, you have to think about projects. For other ways, like delivery, you have to consider tasks or jobs, because it doesn't matter if you delivered. Like, you can only look at the delivery part of a lower like bundling, and like what you bundle together is always a big question. So I think that that you don't have to know everything in the organization in the beginning, but just try to get the knowledge to understand one area. And I have to tell you that I've also been through a lot of like different automation capabilities. And there are areas where I'm like super familiar with, and there are areas where I still don't have the mental model to do that. So for example, let's say vendor management, vendor availability, I don't have the mental model yet. Project management, I definitely have thought it through, and there have been like a lot of feedbacks and everything. And it's not realistic to expect one person to know everything, but with the same set of tools, you're able to get into it and understand it after a while. Okay.
Let's see. Badr Al-Kasabi says, great insight shared. So thank you, István.
Thank you.
Another question. We are starting small with Google API translation. Can you suggest other good empty tools which can be integrated into Trados Studio? I
recommend, because this is a Trados Studio integration question, I recommend that you go into the Trados App Store. So I think that there are many that are integrated with Trados. I mean, that's still the #1 tool for translation. So I would suggest that you go there and then you search there, and then you will see a full list. And which empty engine is the best, I have no idea, because that is really not my field of expertise. Like, that is, empty is the one part that I probably in this industry I know the least about, even though I know how to integrate it and like what it is capable for. But regarding language quality, I've got no clue. And I'm sorry, I wanted to show you.
Yes, go ahead. I think you know, we can take a couple of minutes and go ahead and show us.
So this is, for example, make.com. This is the first thing that I wanted to show you. This is crowding. I don't know how many of you are familiar with crowding, but basically the idea is that in crowding you've got tasks that you need to translate. And we created this scenario because Be Lazy, where it starts, like we have a crowding into Plunet, XTRF, Protemos, whatever integration, just like we have a lot of others from, I don't know, Global Link, Smart Link, MemoQ, Phrase, you name it, but also XTRF portals, PlueNet portals, portals of vLocalize, Lionbridge, RWS, so on. And with crowding, we have an initial requirement, which is that we can only pick up tasks. But there were people who, instead of sending a task, they send an email that says that I am going to be, like, I want you to work on this project. And they send a link. And that's something that we could not do with Be Lazy because that step of creating a task was missing. Of course, you can do this by going into the interface and create a task. But what we were thinking about is that we should just look at this email. And here we receive an email that's, you see a custom mail hook. The email comes in. We are going to look for the pattern, which is https://crowdin.com, translate, and then a lot of digits and everything. And we are going to extract information from this email that matches this pattern. Then we are searching here for projects that match this pattern. Then when we get the project, then we look at the project itself. We search for the files in it, try to understand if they are referring to a file ID or a directory ID. If it's a directory ID, we are listing all the files in it, and then we create a task. Make.com, for example, has a couple of different tools, like Be Lazy, for example, we created a lot of capabilities. In reality, what this is doing is that this is actually just using the APIs. So it's a different setup with the APIs. I think Transifex also has it. No, Transifex doesn't have it. No, Crowdin. Crowdin definitely has it. So the Crowdin application has these capabilities here. And this is the same thing as the REST API. And then basically what this does is that it goes 1, 2, 3, and then you can have like routers, which is the if. You can have array aggregation, collect all the data and put that into an array. It got weighting, like these kind of things. I mean, iterator, array aggregator, and router are the most important things besides the ignoring. So this is, for example, something that we created in a matter of, I don't know, an hour or so for a customer of ours that is already using Be Lazy. I could obviously also show you a video of Be Lazy, which is a user interface for integrations. So it is, everything is on the UI, and it's kind of like you can configure it very, very easily, but you're not able to put one thing after the other that is not on the UI, just like here where you can shuffle and mix everything. I think that this is probably a good start. And if anybody is interested in more, then please get in touch.